Half boy, half god, all Apollo. You're listening to Ranking Rick Riordan, a podcast about Percy Jackson and the whole wide rest of the Riordanverse. I'm Dan.
I'm Olga.
And I'm Clara, and today we're discussing the Trials of Apollo, Book 5, The Tower of Nero.
This episode is brought to you by Triumvirate Holdings. As you may know, Triumvirate Holdings fell under some unfortunate scrutiny a few years back. But those baseless accusations are in the past now. Triumvirate Holdings is all about the future. Under the leadership of our new CEO, Screech Bling, Triumvirate has expanded into the final frontier of real estate, underground caverns. This total disruption of the market has their competitors scrambling and their stock prices soaring. Invest now and receive a hat. Triumvirate Holdings, your tunnel to the future.
Very good, Dan.
I did that without any mistakes. That's got to be a first.
That's a record. I got to say, I was like, is this?
I know.
No, he's rolling with it. One take wonder.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So as you may already have noticed, this is audio only. Video will probably be back for Magnus Case. We're also back to being remote and technical issues abound. And we went multiple weeks of sickness that moved the project down the line. Everything's going crazy. We're going to finally talk about this book. I read it like a month ago. Let's start talking. Oh, first, Spotify has upped the game, and now you can actually rate podcasts on Spotify. So please go and rate us on Spotify. 23 of you already have, and I thank you very, very much for that.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's dope. Also, we've got some more ratings on Apple and Audible. Also fantastic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
I just want to hit on the schedule. So we're clearly doing Nero Part 1 and Part 2. Then we're going to do an Apollo series review where we talk about like our favorite moments, how it stacks up against the other series, and then do like our full rankings of Apollo stuff versus all the other books. Then and I want to hear Clara's opinion on this too, but we're talking about maybe ranking the couples for Valentine's week.
I love that.
We won't have done Magnus Chase yet, so we'll be leaving out Magnus Chase. So I'm like, do we keep it for later, or do we just do it for fun and bring Magnus Chase in later?
No, we binge Magnus Chase.
I mean,
Dan, you're like, yeah. Dan, you're already doing it.
I stopped for a week. I'm actually considering restarting it because I feel like disconnected. But
yeah. I think when we finish Magnus Chase, we do our overall all rankings updated, and we loop in the ships.
Yeah,
as well.
You think we should start the ships now and add them in later?
Now, meaning for our Valentine special, then yes.
All right, so Nero, Apollo review, shipping ranking, and then Magnus Chase.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Tower of Nero. Clara, thoughts?
Okay. I actually wrote this down. I'm feeling very organized because I feel like I need to launch a campaign against you two.
Okay.
I think this book is like the pinnacle of Rick. This is Rick to the ultimate degree, from weird, like, second but quote-unquote bigger villains to heartbreaking character development. And I think most of all, he has such a dedication to learning and growing. And that is a theme of this book, and that is a theme of him. And I just feel like if this is in some ways the end of like his Percy Jackson journey, he's taking it in new directions now. I just can't think of a more grandiose sort of like shining example of him as an author, from the things we like a lot to the things we like a little bit less.
Interesting.
That's interesting.
So I'll say, having done the recap for this today and yesterday, I think I like the book more than when I first finished it. I really, really like the first 75% of this book, and I always have. I thought, up until basically Python, totally on board. Really, really love so much of it. I did not think they'd be able to get me on board with Nero. They totally did. Love Nero in this. I am so happy about how they've turned Nico and Rachel around from Hidden Oracle. Meg is fantastic. This is Meg's book, in my opinion. I personally am still not the hugest fan of the last 25%. I like seeing all the people again, going back and having him visit everybody. I just don't love where Apollo ended, how his interactions with the gods went, how the lack of status quo changes. And this Python was basically exactly what I was dreading. So I'm a little torn, Olga.
I think I'm somewhere in between both of you.
Yeah.
I'm leaning a bit more towards Dan's direction, but I wouldn't even say like it's the last 25%. I would say it's the last like 15%.
Yeah,
I didn't have as much of a problem with the Python fight. Maybe because I've gotten used to it. It kind of to second what you're saying, Clara, of this being like the ultimate Rick book, where I'm like, yeah, it has two climaxes. Like it has like the emotional fight and then the fight, and this was him fighting a giant snake. Like, cool, all right, it is what it is. You still have an emotional moment there, and I was okay with it. Like, I'm not saying it was like my favorite part of the book, but I didn't feel uninvested in that fight.
Yeah.
That said, I do agree about the status quo change. For me, not really having like a tangible change to like hold on to with Apollo was kind of disappointing. And while I very much liked all the visitation all the visiting of like the different characters and locations of the previous books and wrapping things up, I feel like it was like very much consciously Rick trying to toe the line between like being too cute and like perfect while also still like having emotional payoff. And I'm not saying I like felt him struggling with it. I just see how that would be like a divisive, each of those vignettes being a little divisive
in their own ways.
In their own ways, depending on personal taste. So I'm not even going to like poo-poo them one by one. I'm just like, I could see how this won't be everybody's cup of tea with each vignette.
Can I ask a general question? I want both of your opinions on this. Do you think we're supposed to walk away from this book thinking this is a tragedy?
Oh.
That is such a fantastic question, Daniel, that I don't know how to respond, but my knee-jerk reaction is maybe.
Yeah. Because I think that's part of my problem with the last 15% is that I feel like it's a tragedy, but I'm not sure if the book agrees with me.
That's exactly my thoughts, where I'm like, I feel like this is a tragic ending, but he's, with Apollo's last words to the reader are words of hope and like, look at how I've changed and I will change and I am this new person, I am reborn. And I'm like, are you, your life, so to speak, is awful. This is awful. Like in some ways I wish he leaned into the tragedy because, but that's not, again, it's a middle grade book. Like you can't.
I walk away and I go, so he's no longer, he'll never be able to be the Lester that we knew. He's a god now. He's never going to be with the kids anymore in the same way. He can visit them, sure, but it's never going to be the same again. It's like when you get, become the boss of your friends that you used to be friends with. Not going to be the same thing anymore. Instead, he's with this atrocious family that like Rick super underlines. They suck a lot. He says, Olympus doesn't feel like home. I miss the scars I had. I feel more comfortable in Lester's body. Like, this is really sad to me.
Yeah.
And he never even got a choice.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that there wasn't a moment where he got to decide, do I want to keep being a god, being a human, or do I want to become a god?
Yeah.
Well, that was a question that I feel like we were building up to. And then all of a sudden, I don't remember where exactly the turning point was, but he was just like, yeah, when I'm a god again, want. Like, he was sad about the fact that he was going to be a god. And I was like, is there not going to be a question of if you actually do this? And him not having a choice, him and Artemis's reunion scene was like probably one of the most tragic scenes in this book. And then having that followed immediately by the Olympus throne room, it was just like, wait, how? It was just very like not even at odds, but just like emotionally not as following the flow of the Artemisy. And I was like, where is he relinquishing his godhood? Where is he like mourning the loss of his past life truly? Like, and this is the thing where all of that is so sad. Everything of how he's saying goodbye to the demigods is sad. And then in the end, it's nice that it ends with the hope of like, I will be there. I'm a changed god.
Yeah.
But that for me is not really enough. It is not like fully.
I want something I can grasp onto. Like, obviously, I know he is changed. Like, I believe that. I've read these books. I believe he's changed. And I'll even let go of the fact that, like, in 100 years, he'll probably forget half of this. But I need something in his life to change. Like, where does he go from here? Like, and that's the thing is, we had someone write in a few videos back or whatever saying they think it would be great if he took over from Mr. D and became the new counselor person at the camp. And I just can't help but think that is such a better end than what we
that would
got.
be great.
It's just, at least then, like, it's just so much more tangible to be like, he's going to still be with his people, he's going to help them, and he's going to lead them to be the people they can be. And, you know, even if as time goes on, the kids he loves dies or whatever, he can be like Chiron and usher in the new generations. Like, it just, I just needed something like that.
It's difficult because I think it was a conscious choice to not have, again, something too cute, something too convenient, dare I say, to end this. But I walk away being exactly as you said earlier, Dan, like, there's no real status quo change in the world. Apollo, this has always been an internal journey for Apollo, but I would like to see his internal journey exerting influence on their reality. Well,
and it's also, you brought up to me that in the last two pentologies, we did end with feeling like things might change, right? You end Last Olympian, and Percy is going to make the gods claim their children. We're going to, we're going to take all the gods and we're going to have cabins for everybody. And I've learned a lesson and I'm making a change based on that. And even though I don't love Blood of Olympus, same sort of thing with Jason taking it the next step. And I just feel like I am torn because I do understand the gods are the gods and he's not going to change them. But
clearly they're capable of change. If Apollo is capable of change, is it not a question of all of them in the right circumstances?
Or at least him trying, right? Because I just feel like there should have been the moment where he doesn't want to be a god and someone says, you have a unique opportunity. As a god, you are the only person who could actually make a real difference. And I wanted him to walk away from this book with a rallying call of, this is what I'm aiming to do. This is what my purpose is. And I just don't feel like I walked away with that.
I agree. Yeah. So I can't help but feel, while I'm overall satisfied with this book, I can't help but feel that sense of disappointment. And is that something that I'm projecting because I assumed there was like going to be a real difference in their world by the end, even if it's, again, like, I'm going to build a bunch of temples for all the gods. Oh, look, someone else built all the temples. Blah, blah. Like, was that underwhelming? Yes. But this is like, I can see maybe Rick tried to make this different. And our expectations, like mine and Dan's expectations as readers, are like disappointed because he didn't do that. Okay, he like broke the pattern, but sometimes a pattern is a good thing.
Well, so I will say, I teared up at the end of this book. And I would not have done that, I think, if there had been a more external change. And I don't know what that means, but I would not have teared up at the fact that he was a Camp Half-Blood counselor. I feel like the end of this book is personal, not just for Apollo, but for the reader. And it is about, maybe you followed Apollo along on this journey. And maybe, to me, it just really feels like, obviously it is literally speaking to the reader.
Yeah.
I think Rick's hope is that as Apollo went through these trials, the reader might also have discovered things about themselves. So much of this is about recognizing trauma and thinking about how you might start to move forward, but it doesn't get to some sort of satisfying conclusion because that's not how healing works. And so the fact to me that actually, instead of this ending on a fantastical note, it ends on a really realistic, personal, internal note. For me, that's much more satisfying, poignant, and in keeping with this series, I think, which is just so different from the Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying, and I definitely did have to stop and think after reading the part with Zeus, right? Because he basically, it's not what like you usually want, right? Like Zeus doesn't get his comeuppance, but like how was he gonna get his comeuppance? And instead, it's about how Apollo is going to treat him, and you got your comeuppance thing with Nero. And I do think that was honestly maybe one of the core messages going on here at the end of this book. Yep. But I still can't help but feel, even though I see what he's going for, and I feel it and everything, I can't help but feel very dissatisfied on a story level, because I've heard about this bad guy for 5 books, and then we have half a scene, a tiny little scene with him, and it kind of doesn't. I don't know. It's very interesting because, again, if I felt like he was specifically trying to make it tragic, and maybe he is, then I could maybe get on board more. But in some ways, it reminds me that like we get tragedies so infrequently that like I almost don't even know how to handle them, because people always go like, oh, it's unsatisfying if blah 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 doesn't happen or blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, but how is a tragedy ever going to be satisfying? I don't know.
Yes. You want to sit in your tragedy is a part of life, and that's something that the Greek myths very much embrace and exemplify, that tragedy for human. And that's one of the things of they personify the gods. The gods are just people with special powers. It's humans have awful things happen to them, and they might have a lesson from it, and it could be something that you take forward. But sometimes stuff is just going to be miserable and sad, and it's okay it's cathartic to sit with those sad feelings. It's like listening to sad music in a way. It's therapeutic when you're sad sometimes to listen to sad music, because it validates your feelings.
I think ending a 5-book series though is a very different
I agree.
animal.
I agree, which is why it's not it can't end on the tragic note, and why instead he gives it hope. It gives it hope by reminding us Apollo has changed, Apollo is different, and he makes promises to the reader, to the demigods, to be better and to not forget about what happened. And I understand why, Clara, you were so touched emotionally by it. And this is where I'm saying I don't think I disliked it as much as you did. I just kind of wish that there was. I think that it would have been possible to have a status quo change while still keeping in line with this exact internal
Well, that's
monologue.
kind of like what I was saying, as far as having the thing of he doesn't want to be a god, but he does it because it's the right thing to do. That to me still would be tragic. That to me I'd still have that moment of he doesn't feel at home here, but he knows it's where he has to be.
But that comes back to a choice, though, because he doesn't have a choice about being a god. He has to be a god.
Yeah.
Right. And for me, that sort of feels meaningful too. You can change, you can work on yourself, and obviously a tremendous bit of this series is about working on yourself, and you can work to change where you who you are and where you choose to be. And there's actually, I would say that does happen at the end. He's choosing where he is, and only one piece of that is doing godly stuff, and his presence is literally split between all sorts of people he loves and cares about. But you aren't gonna fundamentally change where you come from, or he doesn't have to stay on Olympus all the time. That the end of the book sort of shows that too, right? So but I feel, to me, if he was able to fundamentally change his nature as a being, that would ring false for me to the series.
Yeah, but that's why I think him choosing to be a god is what you go with.
But I don't want to choose. But I don't want him to choose. I don't think I don't have a choice, right? I don't get to choose the fundamental nature of my being. I don't think that is a choice.
On a storytelling level, I want my protagonist to have agency.
But he does. But he does. He gets to choose what he does, right? But he doesn't get to choose who he is.
Here's my thing though. I don't feel like the ending didn't leave me going, he gets to choose what he does. He went on a goodbye tour. Not to say he's never going to see them again, but like, what is he actually going forward to do? Like, what is tomorrow? That is the thing that I felt very much lacking. And
in some ways, I'm starting to come around a little bit on the idea of like, he doesn't know what his tomorrow is going to be. He doesn't know how he's going to process this trauma. The only thing he knows is he's going to be a better person. He's not going to let people feel discarded and used and but even that's actually saying too much, because the thing is, we know, principally speaking, that the demigods will always be used, will always be like forced into these situations that the gods can't
and they
help.
underline that with having to be like, oh, I can't actually help Nico and Will.
Right.
Like, there's no point in me hearing the prophecy because I can't actually do anything. And so, like, I don't know. I get where you're coming from, Clara, and you are swaying me a little bit, but like, I guess maybe it's so you teared up and I feel like I was more angry. Like,
I gathered
but for the same sort of reason, right? Like in that, like he's done such a great job in these 5 books of making me deeply, deeply care about Apollo. And so leaving Apollo in this situation is heartbreaking to me. And that is just not what I wanted for this character. Like, he deserves better than that, in my opinion. That's how I leave.
I mean, but the thing is, he's going to keep looking for something better.
Yeah. I don't know. Honestly, I see where you guys are coming from, and maybe I'll admit, maybe I'm wrong to have the reaction
I don't think
have.
you're wrong. I think I think it's really appropriate to feel angry at the fact that certain things don't change. I think that's another theme in this book. So like, there are 3 sentences when Apollo is interacting with Zeus that I think are like just some of the most incredible I've seen in YA.
Yeah.
So he says, I did not feel that this was a warm and fuzzy reconciliation with my father. Let's be honest, some fathers don't deserve that. Some aren't capable of it. The distinction between what people deserve and what people are capable of, and this is angry and bitter potentially, but it can also be acceptance.
Yeah.
And
accepting the things you can't change.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so Apollo at the end understanding, like, what can I do? I can always come back to Meg. You'll come back, she asked. Always, I promised. The sun always comes back. And then saying, like, you know, this is also about what promises can you actually keep. And what he can actually promise is, you know, anytime you take aim and prepare to fire your best shot, anytime you seek to put your emotions into a song or poem, know that I am smiling on you. We are friends now. Like, that is a promise he can actually keep. Like, and so for him to make that shows all of that growth. It's not about, he's not capable of everything. No one is. He might deserve to have a beautiful, happy, mortal, you know, whatever, but he might not be capable, you know, like, these are distinctions, these are interrelated things, but they're separate, and it's okay to be angry about that, but it's also good, you know, to try to accept it. I just find this so mature as a series. I am so impressed that Rick didn't make it happier, because then I think it wouldn't have been about accepting your life, even when some things don't deserve to be accepted.
Yeah. I see so much of what you're saying. I don't know. I just had such an emotionally... It's not that I wanted a happy ending either. Like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe having him become camp counselor would have been too much or whatever. I just wanted it to be a little bit... I wanted it to be more bittersweet, and this was just more bitter than sweet to me. And like I said, I didn't feel like I was in his head enough post talking to Zeus to know how he really felt about what was going on, like what he wanted out of life going forward, and what he was like. I care. Again, it just comes back to, I care so much about him, and I just felt like he didn't get any sort of, he earned. So the entire series to me is about him earning and overcoming, and
he earned personal growth.
Yes, I agree. So the other thing that I wrote that I really thought was a huge theme here, and I actually think is an overarching theme for the series, is canceling. And I'm like totally serious. So Apollo is like hanging on the edge of chaos and oblivion, right?
Yeah.
And Styx is there sort of like looking at him, and Apollo is like, I am going to be canceled. And it's sort of a joke, but then I started thinking about it like, okay, well, Apollo kind of does deserve to be canceled at the beginning of this book, right?
Yeah.
And what he earns
of the series, you mean?
Yeah. Beginning of the series, yeah, not the beginning of this book. And like we all felt that even, right? Like we really didn't like that first book for a lot of reasons. Like he deserves to be canceled. Yeah. And because people give him an opportunity and he takes that opportunity, he's able to grow and learn and be human. And that's a reward in and of itself, is growth and a sliver of humanity. Like that is the reward of being human, is being human. Like, and he shouldn't need, quote unquote, some sort of gigantic reward for learning and growing and being a better person. He should do that. Like,
but my rebuttal to that is I felt like he was at that place at the end of book 2. He had already earned and yes, he continues to earn more personal growth or whatever. But I was like, I start this book being like, he has changed. He's achieved that personal growth. Now what? What is he going to do with it? And I still end this book saying, what is he going to do with it?
And I think that's right to say. And I like that there isn't an answer, but I also totally like, I would love for this boy to be able to be the head of Camp Half-Blood. I would love that for him. I don't need it for him, but I love it for him. So I would have liked that, but I don't know whether that would have taken away from the tragedy of what being human is about.
Yeah. It's a weird, like, I'm not saying it's actually neither here nor there, because I do think, again, there is a difference. It's just internal. And for all of the demigods, like, again, there is a difference tangibly in that overall Apollo's at least not going to get in their way due to his ego, and will like support them and do what he can in whatever way he can, again with his poignant speech. However, it really where I'm struggling is that I think that there is a certain amount of, and this could be like completely off base, but I think there's a certain amount of queer allegory here.
Interesting.
And I think a lot of this is about chosen family. And the thing is that, and this is what you were saying earlier too, Clara, about like, he knows he can't change like Zeus. He knows he can't change like anyone else. And he just has to like accept that and be at peace with it. And it's tragic, but it's hopeful because he's like moved on from it. But now he doesn't get to be part of his chosen family. He doesn't get to be, fully get to leave the clutches of his like toxic, abusive family, but he also doesn't get to be a part of the family that he actually loves and cares about while he's experiencing dysmorphia. Like that's the other thing where he has this he's not comfortable in his godly body. He wants to be back, like, and this is where also going back to what you were saying about like there are certain things like you can't change who you are essentially, like you don't have a choice about your inner essence. I'm like, right, but people try to improve upon, like people try to find their inner beings and like try to get as close as possible, like and that to me is a little bit like, I'm not saying that was intentionally
I see where you're coming from for sure, and I feel like I leave the book feeling like he is the most loneliest creature that's ever existed.
I just don't feel that. Like, okay, so here's the thing. I would feel much more, because I also really heavily read the Dysmorphia. I don't think of the being as like your body, first of all, because you totally can change your body.
Right.
And so does Apollo. Like, Apollo feels more comfortable in certain situations as Lester. He also is starting to feel more comfortable, and we see that. I feel like this book needed one more chapter.
I agree.
And if it had had that chapter, because I agree, I think it's hinting at the fact that he can still see these people he cares about whenever he wants.
Yeah.
But it doesn't cement that. We need one more, like, he's visiting Meg a second time and everyone is sort of like, wow, I'm so glad. And then we could leave it or something like that.
I wonder if it would have been interesting. I'm not saying I want this necessarily, but it would have been interesting if more time had passed and he was visiting them 2 years later or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. I would have wanted a second visit.
Yeah.
Well, if anything, what we should have gotten is more like, instead of witnessing his first visit, we don't witness that.
Yeah.
And instead we just go through a day in the life of Apollo the god now that some time has passed, and to show he hasn't forgotten. Like, we have to just take it as face value, and that's fine. He's changed. He won't forget this time, even though he forgot what it's like to be human all those other times. This time, it's for real. He was actually like very changed by this experience. So let's say like not even 2 years. Let's just, well, we can't do that much of a time jump because the thing is because of spin-off books.
Yeah.
Like, if this was really the end of the universe, which it clearly isn't,
right?
If this was really the end of the universe, I would have said, jump 5-10 years into the future and just show us a little glimpse of where everybody ended up.
Yeah,
but
you don't want to close the book on Meg McCaffrey either, unless you want to do like, he says goodbye to everyone, and we don't get to see him saying goodbye to Meg this time because that's too personal, and then we do a time jump that's Meg specific, and then you can fill in the blanks with what Meg is doing in between books. But like, it's because that's the most important. Like, their relationship as big brother, little sister is like the relationship here. And while he has like the beginnings of repairing his relationship with Artemis, it's still like, it's a little bit different than him and Meg.
Man, I'm really thinking of that queer allegory thing you were saying.
I'm not saying that dysmorphia is also like limited to the queer experience.
He's like quite literally in the wrong body at the end of this. And I know he can take that form, but like the mind he has now is a human mind trapped in a godly body.
No, it's really true. It's making me think a lot too.
And that's why I feel like I end it, and he doesn't fit in anywhere. He's trapped between two worlds, and neither side will fully understand him ever. And that just is so depressing to me that honestly, the end of this book is the harshest punishment I think he receives in the 5 books.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like it's not that he doesn't get a reward. I feel like he ends with a punishment. and that,
well, the punishment is knowing what it's like to be human. Yeah. But the thing is that humans are collective people. Like, we need other people to survive, like, for the most part, individuals aside. But like, we live in a society, but also like, we need each other, and it helps when we don't have other people, our mental health declines. We need to work together, be together. And Apollo doesn't really have anyone to be there with him. So if he was to like split his consciousness, maybe part of him could stay and living in Ephialtes with Meg. Like, why does all of him retreat, or like as much of him that isn't like in the sky pulling the chariot?
There's a lot of unwritten things about like, well, the unwritten rules of being a god and blah, blah, blah. Like,
I think if we had another chapter, we could be okay. My instinct, and I'm also very much being influenced by the dysmorphia aspect of things. My reading is, he becomes more comfortable in his godly body as he gets used to it again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he wants to interact with the people who he interacted with in Lester's body, still in Lester's body.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I feel like by all of those vignettes, and he's talking during those times as he needs to contain himself, right? Because he's sort of like, he kind of wants to be like erupting into a 20-foot tall, I think he's figuring out how to sort of have the body he wants in a certain time, while understanding that like he's going to want different things at different times.
Yeah. The more we talk, I will say I definitely prefer this ending over Blood of Olympus and Serpent's Shadow. Because even if I don't totally agree with it, it had thought put into it, and it was trying to say something. And the fact that we could have this conversation makes me say this book is worthwhile even to the end. I'm not going to, like, that's the thing where I'm not going to go so far as to say that we're nitpicking, because I don't think we are.
No.
But me and Dan are. I think this is about like what you bring and what you want and what you like, what your takeaway from individual like lines and overall is, and that there's still a lot to take away and enjoy, even if you aren't necessarily satisfied, or what we, case in point, what we don't necessarily find fully satisfying, you find more satisfying than an alternative. Like the fact that this isn't just like cut and dry is in some ways why it is like such an example of Rick's skill.
Yeah.
Yes.
And why it's such an example of like him becoming a better writer.
Yeah.
Both from the very beginnings of the Percy Jackson versus like even the beginning of Trials of Apollo. It's about, to me, his ambition. And there is like, it is a very ambitious book, and there's a lot to pay off, but how it feels like payoff depends on you as a person. He did pay things off. Like, I think,
I think he pushes himself as a writer, but he also pushes his audience as he's grown. He's also been expecting more and asking more of his audience.
Yep.
Even though I don't think he's like writing to the people who were kids when The Lightning Thief came out.
Right.
I think he still is trying to write towards everybody, but he in some ways I think is willing to, I don't know, maybe he sees kids differently than he did back then. I don't know, but
I mean, I think the idea being you could pick up just Trials of Apollo and start reading that. You could, even though it would be very confusing. And I don't think that necessarily it would like make sense without reading, at the very least, Heroes of Olympus. The assumption is that like you've gone on a journey with at least some of these characters and you can follow. Yeah, he's putting trust in his readers, even if they're like, even on the younger spectrum of middle grade, you started and you're learning about them and you're feeling what they feel. And by the time that you get to Apollo, by the time you get to this end, you have understood more about the human condition and tragedy. Like, I don't know when you guys started learning about like Greek myths and Greek tragedy in school, but I think it was like, for me, like around 5th grade, and like learning about Orpheus and oh man, what's her name?
Euripides.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the first tragedies I learned about. Like, oh, he turns around at the last minute and their love is, that's it. He fails. And I'm like, what? What was that about? Like, why would the Greeks remember this? Now this is a huge hit musical, Hadestown, and it's like the big deal about understanding tragedy. But this is the thing, like, the expectation is
Eurydice,
that once
sorry.
Eurydice, I was like, I don't think that's right. But
Euripides is a tragedian.
The point is that, like, once you're old enough to start consuming these books, like, you're old enough to know more about how the world works, and you can contextualize, the world with media and pop culture and relate to it in those ways.
I have 2 things I want to say. One is, it is interesting to me because Burning Maze also is a tragedy and ends pretty tragically, I would still say.
Yes.
And I did not come away feeling the way I feel here. So that's interesting to me. Maybe because
there was more to
go. There's more to go.
Yeah.
So I had a tangible hope, unlike here, where I'm just like, and then I'm gonna help you use your bow. The thing I really want to talk.
That.
Yeah, you're being reductive.
But by the time I got to reading those words, I was already too angry to take anything out of them.
We're sitting where Dan and I are sitting is like
a whole different room than where Clara's
very funny.
Literally.
Pandemic jokes. Anyway, where we're sitting is like, this is a tragedy and it should be treated as such. And like, it's okay to have a positive takeaway, but like, let's just sit with how sad this is. And Clara's like, no, there is hope. Let's go with it. It doesn't have to be all tragic.
But it is tragedy. That's like a Greek tragedy. Like it should have it specifically Greek tragedies end. It's tragic, and it ends with words of wisdom that suggest some sort of hope. They should never be hopeless. And so for me, it's precisely like he is in a tragic. He's experienced a tragedy. And that leads to some increased understanding of something. And that increased understanding is precisely like the goal of everything.
Right.
Yep.
No, I just mean to say that for us, it's like, I completely agree with you about like, yes, it's about like the moral and the hope of like our idea of hope being like the tangible, like there being, again, just coming back to again of like a real world tangible like status quo change versus a pure like not words of affirmation, but sort of like kind of thing where again, if you even go back to some of the first tragedies that Apollo like touches on, it's Daphne, right? And Hyacinthus.
Yeah.
And it's like the hope there and the takeaway morals there are fairly different in my opinion from like the hope and takeaways of like Apollo living as a god after living as a human. Like there it's a spectrum of what kind of hope there is.
No, Dan, you go because I have something I want to read. So
yeah. I'm just gonna say I think to me what was missing was the hope piece. And that's I don't feel like I got the hope piece. And that to me I think is what left me feeling so I don't know, like it what left me feeling so like I was left hanging.
So
and like I don't know if Clara's seen Bly Manor or Midnight Mass. I would consider those both tragedies.
Yeah.
And I did not leave either of them feeling unsatisfied. So I don't know. It's hard to talk about them if Clara hasn't seen them. But
also their like maturity level is fairly different from what we're like referencing a lot of the time with this podcast. But my question there is, if you wanted Rick to lean into the tragedy of this, what would you have preferred? So you don't get him to be camp counselor.
What would I have preferred?
Yeah, like let's say, so you're saying you want it either to be even more tragic and just accept the tragedy, or to have a real world change where he gets a somewhat happy ending.
The way this ends to me is worse than if he died. Like I would rather him die than end this way.
Why?
Because then it's like, well, at least he went out doing the right thing. He changed, he grew, he had the time he had with the people that he loved. To me, I'm like, so he had a speck of time with the people that he loved, and now he has an eternity of this awful thing. Like,
but he doesn't see it as awful, Dan. You see it as awful. He doesn't see it as awful. I don't understand
but that's the thing where I feel like the book isn't agreeing with me and I don't understand it.
He can see them. He can still spend time with them. He can still love them.
Yeah.
I don't understand what you're...
because he doesn't get to participate in their world. He's caught between two worlds, neither of which is his world anymore.
He's a visitor.
Yeah, he's like, it's like being a ghost. Like yeah, okay, Larrys can go and hang out with the other people, but like I wouldn't want to be a Larry.
But Dan, point to where in the text it says he's uncomfortable either with Meg or at Camp Half-Blood.
I mean, the fact that he has to leave at the end of the day.
But is he sad about that?
Yeah.
I think he wishes he was human. I mean, we have when he thinks about, I don't have the text in front of me right now, but I'm pretty sure he like is wistful about Calypso gets to be human and go off and actually live these experiences. The fact that he misses his old body, that alone makes me feel like he feels like he's disconnected. And he is kind of sad that he can't help Will and Nico. And he like, I don't know. It just feels, it very much feels like he's saying goodbye to everyone. And that to me is sad. So
I agree that I think we should have gotten to see him come back again when he's more comfortable in this new situation. Yeah. But to me, he is continuing to try to figure out how these pieces of himself fit together, and he wants to be able to help, and he's not going to promise to help in ways that he can't say he can help, but I think he understands how he can be helpful. He still has those connections.
His promises feel empty to me because they don't mean anything, because he can't actually do anything.
But he can.
Can he? He can help them shoot a bow better? I mean, like,
that's not what he promises. That's not what he promises. He promises to be there.
Yeah, I don't know. It just feels so ambiguous, and it feels empty to me. I don't know. But to each their own.
And this is what I'm saying. We're like, neither of you are wrong. None of us are wrong for our like takeaways. I mean, obviously, I don't think Rick intended for us to be like fully angry and like hate the ending, but like. I think that nonetheless, I think that there's like no wrong interpretation of how you process tragedy.
Yeah.
You process it with either hope or anger or accept it. Like this is the thing where like you're left. This is correct.
You know what it is? You know what it is? Like Clara was talking about the human condition and all that. And I think part of what makes this very upsetting to me is that it isn't to me the human condition. The human condition to me would be he dies. But look at what he did while he was alive.
But you live with tragedy.
Yeah, you live with tragedy. Exactly, Olga.
Yeah,
that's not the human tradition.
But he has to live forever. That to me makes it not human anymore. He's between two worlds, and he has to live with this knowledge forever, and he can't do anything to change his circumstances. That because like as much as I like and get why the Zeus thing is like an interesting, powerful, mature lesson, on the flip side, it sounds to me like, oh, all these evil people that surround you, you can't even try. Like, why even try? There's no reason to try. They are who they are, and they're gonna kill a lot of humans, and they don't care about people. But don't try. Don't.
And that's where personally I struggle a bit is his relationship to the gods and just being like, well, I'm going to be a source of hope for the humans and source of a friend to them. But the other gods have no such obligation.
Okay, but I think it's really important to think about that in the context of familial relationships and what should be expected of kids. So like you can really want your parents to change, but you cannot necessarily make them change. And I think that is a really important lesson.
And
I think kids are bombarded with stories of how like they convince their father to be a better person, right? Or something like that. And this is really like, you know what, like, right, Apollo cannot change certain things about his family. He just can't.
But it has to work on multiple levels. It does work on the level you're talking about, and that's why I partially like it. But it's not just my family. Like, that's part of the allegory. But in the manifest level, these gods are awful in hurting people, and he's a hero. And so him saying, I'm not even going to try, to me doesn't, like, it'd be one thing if he said specifically Zeus, right? Zeus is beyond my help. But the rest of them, maybe I can try to help Artemis understand more. Like I don't know. Like, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
It's difficult when he's sitting there. All right. So even though we're skipping ahead, and I have a feeling we're not going to do the recap in this episode, but
we're close to ending part 1.
Yes. So basically, was it Hermes who said it, or was it Ares who says, like, well, now that you're a god again, who are you going to destroy?
Yeah.
Like, who are you going to like torment?
More than one
yeah, they both
person.
are. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They're like, all right, you're going to cause trouble. And it's like, so we know Apollo will never do that again. But when Ares gets angry, he's going to take it out on a city. Like, this is the thing where he's come back to a family and a group of people who are going to continue to be abusers and going to continue to to do real harm. And this is where it comes. I see where you're saying, Clara, of like, he can't change them. It is what it is. But like, we know that gods are capable of change
because we just read about
Apollo did.
Are gods capable of change, or are humans capable of change? And Apollo was only able to learn because he was human. And I know that's maybe not satisfying. Yeah, I know. I would agree with you.
All the gods individual. Like, this is the problem where I'm like, that is too convenient, because the takeaway is supposed to be like, you have to focus on what you can change about yourself and internalize and bettering yourself and processing your trauma as best you can, even if you can't like process other people's trauma for them. That is an important real world lesson. The unfortunate thing is, in this universe, we know a possible answer for how to make people less crappy. And that's not people, excuse me, gods less crappy. And that's to force them into life or death circumstances as humans and give them the opportunity to better themselves. They could walk away not being better, because Apollo used to be that way.
We don't actually have a way in this world to do that, because Apollo can't do that to them. So
right. For some reason,
only Zeus can.
Only Zeus can.
But I did think of the answer to your question from earlier, which is, if I was going to lean into tragedy, what would I actually want? And I think what it comes down to is I want him to be the one to choose the tragedy. If it was, I can be a god or a human, and I really desperately want to be human, but I know I have to be a god.
Yeah.
Then I feel like, okay, I'm on board. You made the choice. It stinks. It's awful. I feel bad for you, but you learned and you made that choice and you're willing to live with it. And he's willing to live with it now too. But like, the fact that he didn't get to decide, to me is just very hard to swallow.
And I can go along with that. And I can say that I think that would have made this in some ways stronger. I still really like it, but I can see where you're coming from.
I just think that they 100% were building to that moment, and then it didn't happen. Like, even as far back as like book 2 or 1, right? Like, I just feel like it was clear him having to decide between humanity and godhood, and him realizing, hey, this whole time I've wanted to be a god, but actually, is that really what I want? Like, that not having that moment was very unsatisfying to me.
You and I have had this conversation before too, and you were like, it's like, I can't see how he's not going to be human. And I was like, I can't see how he's not going to be a god. And I don't think that Rick is actually leading up to this. Like, we might have that even recorded somewhere.
Yeah, no, we do.
And so, like, for you, I think that choice felt inevitable. And for me, it always felt like it was never going to happen. And so I don't know that it's so obvious that Rick was leading up to it. I think it is truly like an individual, I don't know if preference isn't the right word, but interpretation.
Yeah. I think that it's interesting because in some ways he did toy with Apollo having the choice about it. When Lugusawa goes to sacrifice her immortality instead. And that was like, if Apollo really wanted to stay mortal, he would have like insisted on doing it.
I agree, and I also think that there's an argument to be made that he repeatedly makes the choice to be a god throughout the series and throughout this book, especially with him being, when they tug of war over the fasces, and he's like, I am the god Apollo, and I revoke your divinity. Like, you could argue if you wanted to, that's him making the choice. I guess to me, it's him making the choice in a situation where he has no choice, because the opposite answer is, I let Nero destroy everyone I love.
Like, to bring it back to tragedy, not having a choice in some ways is also like a key element where certain things are inevitable. And another thing that I think is not explored as much as it maybe could have been is prophecy and fate in this series. But like, certain things are fated for Apollo. This is like a Greek mythological universe where certain things are inevitable and they hurt, and you don't have a choice.
Although we end the previous book with you can make your own fate.
I don't think that this is explored to the extent that it could be. It feels like a theme that you can point to, but there are too many mixed signals about it.
Yeah.
I just think it's not necessarily, in my opinion, it's not necessarily mixed signals so much as like leaving it up to interpretation of the individual.
I just don't think it engages with it that much, to be honest.
All right, that's fair.
And I don't think that, and that's fine. I don't think he wanted to super delve deep into that idea, and that's a very overdone idea, I feel like, in general. So I'm kind of okay with that. But I don't know. The other thing, and I guess this is sort of in the same vein, is early in this book, Apollo is worried, what happens if I do become a god? Will I maintain this change? Change can be fleeting, and you can go right back to being who you were. And he's worried about that. And we get to see him for like 3 days. So I don't feel like I have that answer.
I agree. I'm really coming around to like, this just needed, I'll say again and again, this needed one more chapter where he returns after, even if it was just like 6 months for a second visit, or a third, or whatever. But we see continuation.
Yeah. It's very difficult, because part of me is also like, will Apollo keep having mortal, like, demigods? Is he changed enough as a god to like?
Oh, I think he totally will have more demigods. If say he stops for a few months or whatever, but like, think about when Austin dies. You think he's not going to want to have another child?
No, I mean,
Yeah,
like he loves his children now, and like, but the thing is that now he's like, will he not be more of an engaged like, this is the thing where I have a hard time as well, where I'm just like, so will he be more of a presence in his children's lives, taking responsibility because he knows what it's like to be abandoned and the emotional toll of it? Or is he still just like, what it is to be a demigod is to have absent parents, but I will not be a harbinger of doom to my children, even if I am not always there for them?
Well, I mean, I feel like we walk away. He has like the moment with Austin where Austin's like, I'm really glad we had the time that we did.
Right, exactly.
And I 100% read that as,
We're
now
going to have
it's
more.
over. No, I read that as now it's over. Like we got.
There's a lot up to interpretation here.
Yeah. Because
And-
I read that as similar to like if you're dying, right? It's like, I'm glad we had the time we had because it was very special to me. And I know that it's over now. That again, open to interpretation, but that's how I read that.
Well, actually, the subject of dying, and you were saying like why Apollo's life is more tragic because it goes on forever versus like in a human's lifespan, it's limited. Where I'm like, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, his equivalent of forever is the equivalent of a human limited lifespan. Like when a human undergoes tragedy, for the rest of their existence, they have to live and process that tragedy. And that is their own infinity.
Yeah.
So that was something I just wanted to say earlier of like, it is not actually more tragic, in my opinion, just because he goes on to live like millennia, because for a human, their existence is still like millennia of whatever, like it's just, anyway.
But again, to me, it's more like, again, it comes back to me feeling like you're being a ghost. He's lived when you're, unless you're, okay, I guess you could say that being a ghost is like having trauma for the rest of your life too.
That's kind of Blind Manor too.
But that implies a existence in which you never overcome the trauma. In my mind,
no, you learn to live with it. What am I being shown about how he's going to live with it? Because again, I feel like he's stuck between two dimensions.
But he doesn't say that. But he doesn't say that.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel that way. I think if we look at the text, and I agree that it's not completely satisfying and we should have more, but if we look at what's actually there, he isn't saying that.
I just don't understand how that's possible.
Well, but in those last pages. In the way that he says that's
why I'm saying it rings false to me. That's why, to me, it's very clearly a tragedy, and that he's trying to spin it as not as tragic as it is, and it is incongruous to me. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Isn't that kind of life? Like, I know that's sort of bleak, but like, it's true. We're all gonna die. We all live with certain kinds of trauma. We all have to accept things. We all don't get as much time as we want with the people we love and have to divide our attention between them. Like, it's incredibly human, and it's a tragic look at humanity, but just because it's tragic doesn't mean that it's completely bleak.
Again, it just doesn't feel like humanity to me. Like, all your things you're saying are not what I take away from this particular story. Like,
interesting,
because it doesn't. It just feels like this is the beginning, not the. Like, again, like if he died and I walked away thinking, oh, he had the time he had with it, and it was all worth it to him, that would be one thing. But I'm like, this is a speck in his existence. Like,
a life altering speck, though. It's a blip in his existence. Except for the influence that it will have on the rest of his existence.
Yeah, but like, to do
we
what?
We have to take it for faith.
That's the thing.
And that's the thing. And we need some proof of the sustained difference. That's the thing that's missing here.
And I think that's where we've come back to, like, what is the tangible change? Yeah. Because we want to know about that. We don't just want to necessarily, Dan and I don't just want to take his word for it, but we have to.
I can't. I think, again, I read the book a little bit longer ago than I wish I had, but I definitely did take away from the text that he was stuck between two worlds, because the text showed me that none of the people on the godly side will ever understand him. And I did think the Artemis thing was sweet, but I also took away from that she's never actually going to be able to understand him either.
Yeah.
And so that's one world that he doesn't fit in. And then the other world, I think they very much do say he's a god now. He's not the same. It's never going to be the way it was. And I think that's very clear to me.
And that's very human. When you undergo a tragedy, it's never going to be the way it was. And you just have to, you don't know what tomorrow will bring.
Yeah, but again, where's the hope part?
I have some really bleak and also like characteristically Clara thing to say about the gods. Yeah. So I want to point to Hera. One thing about like familial relationships is, it's way harder to change your relationships with your family than it is to change relationships with new people who you meet, because you're meeting them as an adult. You're meeting them on your own terms. You have way more power in those situations. It's way harder, for your family to understand you when you change, because they're always going to think of you in a particular way. However, Apollo's relationship with Hera is interesting because for the first time they see each other and are looking to each other for like understanding because there's an adult relationship. So they are starting to interact with each other as adults who both really care about humans. I think that is the promise. I think it's actually sort of like, yes, Artemis understands, like Artemis cares about Apollo because he's her brother, but it looks to me like an interesting Hera and Apollo relationship that's built on this new thing that's happened in Apollo's life. Mm-hmm. And that is a little tiny dismal level of hope. And I agree, it's not that big, but it's something.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do like that. And I also agree that it's very, very small. And if we got 5 more of those, I think I would have been more satisfied. But I think it's time to end part 1.
I agree.
And I know I've been repetitive, and I apologize for that.
In our repetition, we got further and further and brought up the new points, and I think it's all about how we process tragedy and mortality. And unfortunately, Dan, what I know of you, I think this rings very in line with your life too. And that's where I'm saying of like, it's about your baggage. It's about your like internal processes.
I'll say this much. I mean, my ranking of it is going to be significantly higher after this conversation than it was before this conversation. So.
Great.
All right, what a team.
That's all I wanted.
And with that, we will end part 1 and we will lead into part 2 where we will do the recap. I'm sure it'll be interesting. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please rate us, review us. Oh, and we're going to do feedback, but we're going to wait until the Apollo series review for that, just because obviously we have so much to say. And so we have some great feedback I'm excited to talk about, but we're going to hold it for that podcast. Thank you. And
may the gods
be ever in your favor.
Yes, Apollo especially.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's gonna use his bow and
shut up, Daniel.